All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in this morning for our Introduction to Motivational Interviewing webinar. My name is Lindsay Simpson. I'm the project coordinator for the Center for Evidence to Practice. For those of you who are not familiar with our work, we are a partnership with the Louisiana Office of Behavioral Health. And our mission is to expand access to evidence-based behavioral health practices and programs to providers serving and accepting Medicaid throughout the state. So to go along with our work, we've been sponsoring a number of trainings, including motivational interviewing and other evidence-based practices that are reimbursable by Medicaid. So if you haven't checked out our website, it's laevidencetopractice.com, and there you can learn more about other upcoming training opportunities. So thank you all so much for your participation this morning. And throughout this training, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box. You'll see a little chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Just drop your question there and we will answer them throughout the training as the opportunity permits. And if Dr. Wood gives a chance to verbally ask a question, just please unmute yourself and then you can do so. All right, so I would like to introduce the trainer for the MI training this morning. Her name is Dr. Angie Wood, and she is a master trainer for motivational interviewing and an instructor at Southeastern Louisiana University. So this is the first part of this series. As many of you know, we are having in-person training in Alexandria, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette in early January. So we hope you are able to make it to those. All right. Thank you, Dr. Wood.
All right, thank you. So hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint okay, and you can hear me. Throughout this presentation, I will be showing some short clips of video demonstrations just to sort of make it a little bit more interesting, hopefully, as opposed to just listening to me the whole time, I assure you. We'll try to keep it more interesting. And okay, good, thank you. So everybody says I can see and hear. Although I am going to stop the video here in just a minute. So as Lindsay noted, I am a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. The MINT is an international organization started by Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick, who are the developers of this approach. So you're gonna hear me refer to Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick off and on a couple times throughout the presentation, just because they are the ones who have the ultimate expertise on this, but they started this organization to train and disseminate motivational interviewing. And so it is something that I had to apply to become a member of and attend a training to be a part of it. And I am one of two trainers in the state of Louisiana. I've been training people on motivational interviewing since 2005. But as a MINT member, I've been doing that for 3 years now, a little over 3 years actually. And so what I'm gonna do is, this is gonna give you the concepts and the background of the approach to give you all sort of the basics of it so that when we meet face to face, we can spend more time really working on applying the needs and the strategies. So let me work this thing out. All right, just want to make sure. All right. So the objectives for this webinar is to go over the motivational interviewing processes. There are 4 processes that I'll briefly go over and talk about the principles of the approach. That's part of the spirit of this. And then we'll talk about motivation as a multifaceted concept and how ambivalence fits into the picture. And then we'll talk about what change talk is and sustained talk. And then I will finish with talking about the core skills or techniques, that's OARS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, summarizations, and we'll also talk about elicit, provide, elicit. So that should probably take up most of the time. I will save some time at the end, is that's my plan for questions, but if there is something that comes up along the way, we can, I can certainly try to answer whatever questions come up. So first of all, let's start out with just generally defining motivational interviewing. And I think that it's probably something you've heard of, otherwise you probably wouldn't have signed up for it. But to really understand, I get a lot of interesting perceptions of what it is from time to time when I train people, and that we think that, of course, the term interviewing makes it sound like you're trying to interview somebody for a job. But really it has to do with it being really a communication style. I think in some ways interviewing is sort of a misnomer, but it really does focus on motivation. And how do we help somebody build their own internal desire and commitment for change? It is a very person-centered approach, so it is collaborative. It is goal-oriented, so it is not a non-directive kind of approach. So there is a purpose and intent to what we're doing. And we do this by paying attention to the language of change. So we try to elicit and explore their own reasons for change to build that commitment. And we do it in an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So again, that's a very person-centered sort of approach. So we believe that you don't need to coerce or convince somebody to change. You help them basically convince themselves. It's not through our own wonderful pearls of wisdom that we argue for change, that we help them to do that for themselves. So it's a very much a guiding, collaborative approach. So when we talk about the spirit of motivational interviewing, Miller and Rolnick say that that MI is, it's really a style more than it is, it's not a technique. Sometimes we call it that. But really the techniques and the strategies aren't just motivational interviewing. The techniques those are core counseling skills. So they're not unique to motivational interviewing. What's unique is how we use all of these strategies and skills. So if we view it as that, you know, I'm here to guide you towards change and I'm not here to convince you, if you're very comfortable with really being much more guiding and helping the client talk through it, then this approach will fit very well with what you already do. If you tend to be a little bit more directive, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but just that sometimes we're more accustomed to going ahead and sharing a lot of information and being much more directive in what the client needs to be doing, then this approach will be a little bit more tricky for you. So there are 4 processes in this approach, and this is all based on the latest book. They have a 3rd edition that came out a few years ago, the 3rd edition of Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change. And they really have refined these processes as well as the principles that I'm going to be talking about. And so they refined the 4 processes to really kind of mimic more of what we do in therapy, that motivational interviewing isn't just getting somebody to commitment for change, but actually we can use a change planning approach as well. But that is sort of the last thing that we do, and that's a different workshop. So thinking about these 4 processes, these really aren't just strictly linear. We do certainly start by engaging, right? So that is a common client-centered approach, is that you try to build rapport, your therapeutic alliance. So you want to establish that helping relationship and that connection. So you do start by engaging, and then we get to focusing. And so focusing really is something that that maybe we might do this unintentionally at times, but with motivational interviewing, we really do, our focus is trying to figure out what it is that they're ambivalent about. What do they think that they might want to change? And trying to determine, this is where we determine the agenda for the session. And so there may be goals that you are supposed to see to, maybe your referral source. If you're working with children, maybe the parents have a certain agenda. But that doesn't mean that's the same agenda that the client has. So this is the point where you're trying to come to an agreement about what the focus of change will be. What is it that the person is currently thinking about changing? Once we've done that, then we want to explore that. So what is it they want to change and why? So we elicit their motivations. What tells you that this is something you want to change? What are you concerned about? What happens if you don't change this? But we also may get at, and how confident are you that you can make this change, and how important is it to you right now? Which we'll get into that in just a little bit. And then lastly, then we get into formulating the change plan. So this is where the how are you going to make that change? And so what happens is that we often kind of skip over the why do you want to make this change, and we want to hurry up and get to, well, how can you do things differently? How do you manage your anger better? How do you quit using drugs? How do you whatever? So sometimes that's really where this approach comes in, is that we have to be able to understand where the client truly is and move towards the change plan. And once you get to the change plan, then that's where you might start to implement other kinds of approaches. The principles of this approach. So then we have PACE. This is the latest acronym that they talk about. So they don't have separate acronyms for principles and spirit, that the principles lead to the whole spirit of this approach. So the first three principles, partnership, acceptance, and compassion, fit with any kind of client or patient-centered type of approach. So these may not be terribly new to you. These are something that we can use throughout, no matter what type of interventions that we're using. It's the evocation piece that makes this unique. So the partnership piece is that collaborative approach. So you have content expertise, you have processes expertise, but the patient or the client is still the expert on themselves and what's going to work for them. So we want to approach them in a way that respects their experiences and their values and what's important to them. So we're trying to take off this fix-it hat that we talk about in this approach, and that, you know, that we don't start out directive. We're not there to say, to spend 2 minutes on here's your problem, now here's how you fix it. You know, we're not handyman, but this certainly is a tool in the toolbox for sure, that this is not the only tool that you would be using. But it is a much more guiding kind of approach to help them meet their goals. So I'm going to show you just a real quick clip about how we might demonstrate partnership. And I want you to pay attention to the woman on the right. She's actually a psychologist, but she's playing a health coach in this scenario. And I want you to pay attention to what is she doing that demonstrates partnership. Oops, sorry, lost my thing. Here we go.
Well, hi, Terry. It's nice to see you today. Hi, Denise. And we have about 15 minutes to talk today, and I got some information from your doctor that you've got diabetes and you've been wanting to work on some things related to that. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're interested in exploring?
Yes, actually, I was diagnosed, in July of 2007 with type 2 diabetes. And at the onset of that diagnosis, I was really good about watching what I ate and exercising, and lost about 30 pounds. However, life happens, and I went back to eating again, just falling off the wagon with the diet, so to speak, and the exercise. And what happened was, when my mother passed away this past July, I went into a kind of an emotional tailspin, and I thought, well, at this point, I'm just going to take control of the diet again and go ahead and diet. And what happened is my back.
So what do you notice about what the woman on the right did? How did she start the session? And she started by asking an open-ended question, right? So she asked her, this is, what I understand, what brings you here today. Tell me a little bit more about it, right? So we start our partnership off by asking, what brings you here today? How can I help you? What would you like to work on types of questions, right? So that is the ultimate person-centered type of approach to start with anybody that we're working with. There's also something else she did, which is why I let the patient continue talking a little bit, is what else did the health coach do? She listened, right? So she nodded her head. She used good active listening skills. So she paid attention as the woman is talking. So that's a great way to start with partnership. The A in PACE is acceptance, and acceptance actually has 4 A's under it. But all of these lead to that idea of being accepting, that this helps our clients feel safe and provides them an atmosphere where they can begin to trust, right? So we want them to be able to feel safe about talking about change and the vulnerability that comes with admitting that there's something I need to do differently, right? So we can demonstrate unconditional positive regard, which I believe that's from Carl Rogers. That's the absolute worth. So it is not judging the client for anything that they've done or who they are, that you believe they're a worthwhile person that you want to help. So there is this neutrality about your perception of the client. There's also autonomy. So we want to support their right to choose. So except for those, exceptions such as suicidality or homicidal thoughts, that in general, we respect that they have the right to choose what they ultimately do or do not do. And it's important for us to not take that personally, that we want to certainly have our clients held accountable, right? That we want them to take responsibility. And so we can actually reinforce autonomy. I'm going to show you an example of that in just a moment. We also want to give them affirmations. That lets them know that that promotes that absolute worth, and it shows that you believe in them even when they may not believe in themselves. So finding some sort of positive feedback to give them. And you'll notice that affirmations is also one of the techniques. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. The last piece is accurate empathy, and perhaps one of the most important pieces. Acceptance can often be demonstrated through this accurate empathy, that we are able to understand through the client's eyes. I like to say that empathy, it is about putting yourself in the client's shoes, right? We've heard that saying, but it's important that we really work to take off our own shoes before we get into their shoes, and that we do try to understand. It doesn't mean we agree, but it means that we understand. So let me show you some examples of this. So first of all, here's an example of accurate empathy, and I think this is a continuation from the health coach. So let's see how she demonstrates empathy with this patient. And it did it to me again, sorry. My clicker is not working right.
I didn't have any real emotional issues going on, nothing where I was in crisis. And then when I was laid off and my mother passed away, and there was a series of events this past 2009. Yeah.
So when things are going good, you learned how to do it, and then things kind of, the stresses, and sounds like you've had some really pretty dramatic stresses that happened.
Major stresses
during that time.
So I like the way that the health coach puts it into her own words. So she's doing a reflection based on what the woman has told her so far. So she brings sort of that's truly that mirroring effect. So she's clarifying, making sure that she's understanding her correctly, but it also helps the client to understand themselves as well, that this is what you're saying. And you notice that she didn't say, so what I hear you saying is, she just went into it, so when things are going well and when they're not. And then she actually demonstrates some feeling and sort of compassion there, right? Saying, it sounds like you've really been through a lot. So that's some good empathy right there. Absolute worth, now this one's a little trickier, is, that really absolute worth may come from sort of how you frame things and how you respond to the client. So let me show you this other, it's one more health one. They're not all health ones, I promise, but these were some good examples of absolute worth.
Well, I'm a member of a health club, and I don't believe I've been in their fiscal year. I don't think I've been once. So it's the most I've done in the way of exercise at this health club is to carry its card around in my pocket.
Yes. So you signed up for it.
I signed up for
something you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Just haven't been able to make it fit.
Right.
So how is that absolute worth, right? So the guy is talking about getting this card, right? But then he says, I don't go. I've never gone. I just carry it around. He's a little funny, right? I carry it around in my pocket. But what does she do with that information? So, she doesn't, question him about, well, why didn't you use it? Didn't make suggestions for how he could make sure he uses it. She is actually supportive, and she reframes it. Technically, that's a reframing reflection, that she frames it in a way that says, it is something you wanted to do. So see how that really affirms his worth, that she's not judging him. And I want to show you this autonomy one as well. So this one is a guy who is supposed to quit drinking and is not too thrilled about doing any kind of treatment. So how does she reinforce autonomy? Let me get my thing back here.
You said people come here to live. Do you think I'd have to come here to live?
Well, I think, you're the one that really needs to make that decision about what's the right kind of treatment for you. I couldn't decide that for you.
I wouldn't mind coming here to live, but I wouldn't want to be in one of them places where you sit around in pajamas, bunch of long-haired hippie types crying and bitching and stuff like that. That ain't my style.
So you're kind of wondering what it would even be like here.
Well, I've seen pictures of things, watch TV and some of that stuff.
So he's kind of funny too. But so he asked, do I have to stay here? And she says, well, that's up to you. You have to make that decision. Now, I understand that there are certainly mandates that occur, and there are things that maybe we have to make recommendations for the level of treatment. There's different things that occur, but I like the way that this still, ultimately, it is up to the client, right? So there may be consequences for not choosing or not complying, but this is a great way to still reinforce that you ultimately make that decision, even if you don't like the choices put before you. It is still your decision. So she's reinforcing that in this guy. So I like the way that those are some examples of acceptance, how we demonstrate acceptance. And then the C in PACE is compassion. And this is new. They added this in the 3rd edition and felt that it was separate from partnership and acceptance, although I think that it still all fits together in part of the spirit of the approach. Whereas I feel like partnership and acceptance are more objective, that, those are ways of you not taking stuff personally, that you are, you're the guide, you're sort of that third-party guide that's working with them, but this is the more subjective piece. However, I'm still here because I care about you as a human being, and I want to help you. I want to work with you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be warm and fuzzy. It doesn't mean you have to be touchy-feely about it, but it does mean that, you demonstrate that compassion through all of your active listening, through being accepting, through accurate empathy, through affirmations, and all of the other things that we do. And then lastly is, we're going to get to this a little bit more in a bit, but to evoke change talk is what makes motivational interviewing, that this separates it from any other type of patient-centered, cognitive, humanistic types of approaches. So we seek to evoke the change talk. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. But let me give you, let me give you this. This is a short demonstration of evoking change talk. And so this is Bill Miller right here, and he is interviewing a man who doesn't want to quit drinking. So how does he ask this question? What kind of question does he ask him?
Drift those lanes. Well, tell me this: where in your life has drinking maybe just had an effect on you that you weren't too happy about, or times when it was kind of a hassle for you, something like that?
I guess the biggest thing was it was in high school. Yeah, it was in high school mostly. I think it was just tests, in high school, I was starting to drink, and it was, I guess I didn't know my limits as much, and I didn't know, how much I should drink before and how much I should study, and where's that balance point? I don't know. I guess I don't really feel I have a problem with it. I guess the only problem was that I guess I bombed some tests. I can recall an English test that I bombed because I didn't study and because I need more time to recuperate because of the hangover.
Yeah.
And said, but.
So, other than the young man trying to let Bill Miller know he doesn't have a problem, right? And trying to balance drinking, that kind of concerns me a little bit. But Bill Miller starts it by asking him, tell me about a time that you maybe, had some undesirable outcomes, right? Something that happened that, was less than desirable, right? And so he asked it, that's a very open-ended question, and he doesn't ask it close-ended. So he doesn't say, has there ever been a time that you had maybe some kind of consequence because of your drinking, that it maybe caused you some sort of a inconvenience? He doesn't ask it that way because that would be too easy for this guy to say, nope, I can't think of anything. It's never done that. But where he says, well, tell me about a time, you feel kind of obligated to answer it. And you could see the guy's wheels turning. So it really prompted him to think that he really had to think, and maybe he's kind of reaching, but he made it. Like he got to a point where he was able to say, I maybe bombed some tests because I was hungover and had drank too much. And so that's something that can be useful. So the difference is that you might ask open-ended questions that get at information, and those aren't against motivational interviewing, but they're not actually part of MI. So let's say you ask somebody, tell me a bit about your drinking, how much, how often, that kind of thing. So you're trying to get like maybe quantities and different aspects of their drinking. But maybe you're doing that to get to asking, well, when you drink that much, what happens? So now it is evoking change talk. So what is this guy talking about? He's talking about how his drinking has caused some problems in his test taking, right? So that's something that could motivate him towards change. And so we'll get to that too, as we talk about change talk. So I think what I want to do, I have an issue with the starting over. Okay. And then just to kind of summarize some things about MI to this point, as I mentioned, it's not a non-directive approach. It isn't that, like pure Carl Rogers was you just let the client kind of go where they want to go. That's not really what this is. It's not just being nice. It is being respectful in accepting. And as I mentioned, it's not really a technique, it's a style of being with people, much like empathy is. It's not a panacea. It's not meant to be the end-all be-all. It is a tool in your toolbox, and just knowing when it's time to use it is what's most important. And the research shows that it's more effective when it's used in conjunction with other evidence-based practices. It's not meant to be a comprehensive theory of change. So some of you might be familiar with the stages of change by Prochaska and DiClemente. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. This fits very well with that, but it's not really all inclusive of that. It's really meant to address people in contemplation and getting towards preparation and action. So it's not necessarily taking all of that into, it's really just kind of getting them towards towards a decision to make a change and preparing. And it's not really meant to be manipulative. Some people say it seems manipulative in a way because we're not being overly direct, you know, that we don't just come out and say it, that we try to help them figure it out. And it might seem like the long way around, it's roundabout, but it's just that guiding style. So again, it's not non-directive, but it's not overly directive. It's really about guiding and asking, really using good questions and reflections to get the person to make the decision for themselves. So let me hold up just a second here, and I think I'm gonna check in my chat box here real quick. Oh, it's just Lindsay putting that in there if anybody has a question. All right, so go ahead and I just wanted to see if there's any questions up to this point before I move on to motivation. It looks like everything's good. I think I can see when somebody does type something, it pops up something for me. So I'll try to check that when I see you put something in there. So let's talk about what motivation is. You know, what do we mean by building their commitment for change? And so motivation, we might often think about it in terms of, my thing isn't working. Okay, we might think about it in terms of either you're motivated or you're not, right? Sometimes we think of it very simplistically, that if a client doesn't seem completely committed, we say that they're in denial, they're not motivated. The truth is most people are actually pretty ambivalent, excuse me, about change. You know, some people might be very ready, some people are not ready at all, but typically people are somewhere in between. So one thing I want you to do right now is to think about a change that you know you should make, but you haven't been successful at it. Either you're not working on it right now, but you know you should, or maybe you are kind of working on it, but not there yet. Right? So think about like a behavior, you know, something you need to change. It could be diet, it could be exercise, it could be being more organized. It could be not procrastinating, you know, maybe I already said that. So whatever it is that you're thinking, I need to do better with that. Now I want you to think about how long has it been since you first told yourself, you recognized it and said, gosh, I think I should probably do something about this. Maybe I should make a change. So how long has that been? So I want you to think for just a moment. Has it been a long time? Has it been a year, 2 years or more? Maybe it's more recent, the past 6 months, maybe even the past 3 months. But if you think about, most of you are probably thinking it's probably been a year or two. And so what does that tell you about change? That if we know that it's something we should change, but we don't finish it, right? We don't completely commit to it and get into maintenance stage, right? That change is kind of hard, right? And what keeps you from making that change? So it's not that you don't see it, right? That you recognize it, but maybe you don't have a lot of time. Maybe you feel like there's not enough time. Maybe it's just not as important to you as some of the other things on your long list, right? Your long to-do list. Maybe, you know, there's money involved with it, you know, different things, right? So something gets in the way, but it doesn't mean that you don't want to change. So motivation really isn't something that is unchanging, right? That it's really not typically an all or nothing thing, and it's not a trait. So it's not like you're always a motivated person all the time, right? Most people aren't there to say, I'm ready, I'm confident, I can do anything you tell me to do. I'm going to go home right now and do it, right? So most people aren't quite that committed to change. If anybody's ever seen Office Space, you know, yeah, you can go ahead and move your stuff over, right? So if you find that somebody seems like they just nod their head and act like they're going to do what you told them to do, but then they don't, and you meet with them the next session and then they really haven't done anything, that's the person who, you know, really still needs to be engaged. So instead of actively resisting you, they're being passive, basically passive aggressive. and I would recommend using some motivational interviewing strategies with that person. Really what motivation is, it is multifaceted. So if we think about it as ready, willing, and able. I love this cliche. Miller and Rolnick do use this in their book to introduce the idea of motivation. We'll talk about it more in terms of change talk, but really, ultimately, the bottom line is being ready, willing, and able. That motivation is about all three of these things. And we're going to come back to readiness because actually that one's pretty key. I'll explain in a moment, but I want to start with willingness because really willingness is kind of the desire for change. It is a want, but it is a want because you recognize the problem. So this perception of discrepancy, the reality is different from what you wish it was. So unless you perceive the discrepancy, you're not going to have problem recognition, and why would you change, right? If it's not a problem, why would you even change? So this is the bottom line. So what I asked you about was something that you do recognize. It is something that you might be willing to work on. And so if you have problem recognition, you have kind of half the battle already. So that person's not in denial, right? They're not really resistant. They just may not have all of the pieces of motivation that is needed to commit, that is needed to move forward with a change. So instead of thinking of them as resistant or in denial, they're actually might just be ambivalent. We also often forget about confidence for change, their confidence in their ability. So this is where, I wish I could. So it doesn't mean that they don't recognize the problem. It just means that they don't feel very confident in their ability to do it. And if they feel pressured and try to be convinced that they should make this change, and even trying to tell them, oh, you can do this, we think we're being encouraging, oh, you can do this, they might get defensive. And so this is where we see them make excuses to not change. This is what we're going to talk about in a moment. This is sustained talk. It's not really that bad. I didn't want it anyway. Or it's really not my problem. If so-and-so would just leave me alone and stop bothering me, I would be okay. So they can get defensive when we're not recognizing this issue with confidence and we're not addressing the issue with confidence. So that brings us to readiness. So this is the most interesting piece because so they recognize the problem. Maybe they have confidence, I've done it before, I can do it again, but that may not be a priority. So that's when you say, I don't have time, I don't have this, I just don't see how I can fit, whatever. A lot of our other excuses sort of fit under the prioritization of it, and that we put other things before it. And we put other things before it because we prioritize how we spend our time based on what we value the most. So whatever it is about the change isn't of high value yet. It's not linking to one of your most important values. So it doesn't mean that it isn't somewhat important. It just means that it may not be a 9 or 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. So that could be the other piece, is when you're feeling like, well, they sound like they want to change, but they're not really doing it. That may be the holdup, is that they're not prioritizing it. So if there is problem recognition, but there might be a lack of confidence and or lack of prioritization, that is the ambivalence, right? And ambivalence only occurs when there is the recognition of the problem, the risk, costs, and harm that behavior may be causing. So it's not denial, right? But there's still some attachment to that old behavior, right? Like, especially you think about diet. I mean, food tastes good, this tastes better than that. And sometimes it's hard to really be that interested in what that new behavior is, just doesn't sound all that good. And so this is very normal. Feeling two different ways about something is very normal. And we do that when we experience the ambivalence. It's our natural tendency to want to resolve it. It's a type of cognitive dissonance. And so we naturally want to resolve it. And, we may resolve it towards not doing anything different, that we go back to the status quo. But in motivational interviewing, we're trying to purposefully move them towards the desired change. So some examples. So ambivalence can be very obvious, like, that would be great, I would like to change that, but I don't say, oh, I have time to do that. That's kind of obvious ambivalence, but we want to also be able to listen for those little small nuances where the person isn't committed to not changing, right? So I have examples here. For example, say the mother says, I've tried different ways to discipline my son, but nothing seems to work. How is that ambivalence? So I'm just kind of asking you rhetorically, but I want you to think a second. How is that ambivalence? Where is it that tells you that maybe she does want to change, right? So her excuse is that nothing seems to work, but on the front end, she's saying, I've tried different ways, that she does want to do something different. She wants something to work. That's where you want to go. That's what you want to go with. Let's say the son says, I guess I shouldn't disrespect my mom, right? So where's the ambivalence in that? Right? So there would be no ambivalence if he said, I can talk to my mom however I feel like it, right? But he's saying, I guess I shouldn't disrespect my mom. So that tells you that there's some thought here of saying, well, maybe I should do it differently, that there's potentially a desire for change. So that's what we want to focus on. And so your response to these matters. That's where this is where this approach comes in at. So the first one with the mother, I've tried different ways, is you want to say, well, tell me about those ways, right? So you don't want to off the bat make suggestions to her about, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? As you want to say, what have you tried? Or the son says, I guess I shouldn't disrespect my mom. Well, what tells you that? What makes you think that maybe you should talk more respectfully to her? So then what you're going to get are responses that are very helpful towards building motivation for change. So we want to listen for that ambivalence. So that's part of the engaging and focusing, is that you're trying to listen and figure out, where are they? This is truly that piece of, determining where the client is. We're supposed to start where they are, right? And so the person, so we need to have some kind of problem recognition, but they could also even think that it's very important. But if they don't have confidence in their ability, it's going to be a struggle to change. Or they could be willing and confident, but it's not a priority at this time. Or they could be willing, so they have problem recognition, but they don't have prioritization or confidence. So now there might be no ambivalence, and that could be because the person is not motivated at all. So if they don't see it as a problem, they don't see where they need to make any change. It doesn't matter if they're confident or they're not ready for change. Then there is an ambivalence, and that means that they're not motivated. So that's different. We need to develop the discrepancy. Now they could be highly motivated and be ready, willing, and able. And so if you have somebody who is saying, gosh, I really need to do something about this, there's different change talk we'll talk about here in just a second, but you want to listen for that change talk. To know that we're not going to stick around and talk about the why of change, that we're going to move on to how. All right, so any questions so far? Okay, so change talk. So this is the terminology I'm going to be using when we meet face-to-face. And so change talk are sort of like self-motivational statements, I think is what they used to call it. And so this is their argument for change. So all these are the reasons why they would change. This is their confidence. This is why it's important, their values that support the change. Anything like that really is the change talk. And keep in mind that some of the reasons for change isn't just how they benefit from the change, but all the bad stuff that's leading them to think that they probably should change it. So change talk, there are types of it. So we mentioned when you can always use that. Here is the technical stuff that Miller-Rollnick talk about, which is desirability, reasons, and need. So that's preparatory change talk. Or you might be hearing commitment or activation or taking steps. I'm going to talk about that. So these are the different types of change talk. So you remember the slide about evoking change talk. this is what we're trying to evoke. We want to evoke their desirability, reasons, and need, get to the commitment. So what do we mean by that? Well, preparatory change talk, if this is what they seem to be saying to you as you're talking, maybe they say, I want to do better with my anger. There's something that, what is it that they want to work on? It could be have to do with their ability, right? So I know I can do better. I've done it before. So maybe you hear confidence. Maybe they talk about their reasons for change. So remember, it could be the benefits of change. You don't want to keep getting in trouble. Or it could be, so what does that cost you? What's been getting in trouble cost you? So the downside of not changing. And then they could have need. Need is the urgency, and that's sort of the prioritization piece, is I have to do this. I don't just want to do this, I have to. So if you're hearing all of this, then you might get to the activation or commitment change talk. So activation of change implies the commitment without actually stating it. So commitment says, I will do this. Activation means I'm willing to or I'm ready to. So if you hear the desirability, reason, need from them, then you can ask them, so are you willing to work on this? What do you think about moving on to talking about how you might work on this? So it's checking, at this stage right here, you want to check out with them to make sure they are ready, willing, and able to do the change plan piece, which might start to sound like taking steps. So the taking steps is if they come to you and they're already saying, hey, I'm already doing something. I went to a support group, or I'm taking my medication like I'm supposed to. If they're doing some things towards the change, then you have somebody with some commitment, and you can go from there. So the change talk tells us whether they're ready, willing, and able. So we ask open-ended questions, we use reflections and all of that to help elicit this change talk. And if they seem to be kind of stuck in the preparatory change talk, and we'll talk about this, we're going to talk about sustained talk here in just a minute, but if it seems you get some of the change talk, but then they also make excuses for not changing, then we need to focus on evoking more change talk. And those are strategies we'll talk about when we meet face-to-face. If the person says that they're willing to or starting to take steps, then we check in with them. We confirm their readiness to begin to work on the change plan, which will cover the how are you going to do things differently. So on the flip side, we have sustained talk. So typically what you're going to hear is a little bit of both, right? So that's where you have to be able to sort through it. And the combination of the sustained talk and the change talk is the ambivalence, right? That you have to know what to do with that. How do you move them out of the ambivalence towards change? And so the sustained talk are essentially the excuses to not change. And it can mirror the change talk types. So instead of desire to change, it's desire not to change. Like, I don't know if I really want to do this right now. Or lack of confidence in their ability to change. I don't see how. I would like to do it, but I don't see how I could. Or maybe they have reasons not to change. Like if I do all of that, then, for example, actually one real example I've heard clients say in my past years when I was in practice was, I don't know that I really can or want to get a full-time job because I'm going to lose my disability benefits. I'll lose my Medicaid, and I need that for my medications. So there are reasons why they might have a belief in or want to stay in the status quo. So they might say some things. This is just pure sustained talk. I don't have time for this stuff. I prefer to handle my own problems. So that's a lack of desire, right, to engage in treatment. I don't see how I can possibly do that. So it's lack of confidence, right? I don't see what the big deal is if I smoke some weed. So that's a reason. That's their value, is that weed's not a big deal. Klonopin is the only medication that helps me relax. So that's their reason to keep asking for it, to not quit using that medication. Or the urgency need one might sound like, well, I have to smoke. I'll seriously hurt someone if I can't smoke. So those are all potential examples of just sustained talk. But again, and if we hear that, especially just pure sustained talk, we want to avoid focusing on it, that you really want to try to get at any kind of the change talk. That's why it's important to be able to recognize it, and that's what you want to ask about. You don't want to ask, why don't you want to change? You want to ask questions about, well, what would happen if you did change? How do you benefit from it? And what's it going to cost you if you don't change? And so change talk is the positive side of ambivalence. Sustained talk is the negative side. And so what happens when we focus on the negative, right, is that they tend to talk more and more about it, right? And the more they talk about not changing, the less likely they are to change. We also want to avoid using the righting reflex. That's the urge to correct the client or convince them why they're wrong and you're right. So you may not mean it that way, but that's how it comes off. So if they give an excuse and then you try to counteract that excuse by saying, well, but here's why you're wrong. Here's the other side of it, that they're going to view you as somebody who's trying to exert their authority over them. And, again, you have the best intentions behind it, but that's not necessarily what they're going to take from it. And typically when you try to convince them the other side of it, they're going to argue back again, right? So then you're going to end up arguing with them. That's typically what happens with the righting reflex. So this tug of war, then you've got sustained talk on one side, change talk on the other. And so if you keep pulling out the sustained talk, why don't you want to change? Why do you think that way? Then you're going to pull them towards not changing. If you pull towards the change talk, and that would to help resolve the ambivalence, and saying, well, what would happen if you did change, and how would that benefit you? What have you been successful at changing in the past? All of that more positive side of things, then they're more likely to make that change. So the goal of motivational interviewing is to cultivate the change talk. And so we cultivate that by asking questions that get at change talk, and then responding to their answers in ways that use accurate empathy and affirmations. Then we want to also soften the sustained talk. So this is where we want to guide them away from the excuses without giving into the righting reflex. So sometimes we actually ignore it. So if they give you an ambivalent statement, sometimes you don't want to include reflecting that. Now, there are going to be some times that we do reflect it, and we can talk about that when we do the face-to-face stuff. But generally, if you are getting some change talk, if you're going to reflect the sustained talk, it needs to include the positive side. So it's like you're trying to build up that ambivalence of, wow, you feel these two different ways at the same time. If you do that, then it's okay, but you don't want to only do that you want to work towards only reflecting the change talk. So I didn't have a chance to fix this video, but I think I'm going to stop it at a certain point. I was having trouble clipping it. So I apologize, but I'm just going to show you, I think I'm going to stop at about 4 minutes in. So this is an interview of how she cultivates. She's going to use PACE, she's partnering with him. She's using empathy and absolute worth. I don't think we'll get to an affirmation. You'd have to watch the whole thing to get to it, but this is a good example of motivational interviewing. And this is a guy who has been referred for parenting and is not really that interested in going. So his name is Fred.
So Fred, I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about what brings you here today to the Parenting Center. I have a report from the social worker saying that you've been referred for parenting skills class, but I don't know much more about it than that.
Yeah, I got upset and I blew up at the social worker. She called me and told me that the teacher had reported a mark on Mikey. And so I got upset. And it wasn't so much that she called about the mark. That really got me upset. Mm-hmm. She made me feel as though maybe I wasn't being a good father. And because I'm trying to be a better father, and she made me feel as though I was abusive to Mike.
the interaction you had with her, you ended up with a feeling like she thought you were an abusive father. And particularly, she wasn't picking up on the fact that you've made a lot of efforts to be a good dad to your boy.
Well, I understand that she wouldn't know because I don't know her. She doesn't know me. But then I felt maybe she was just assuming, from one mark that there was a history of abuse. And I really don't. I mean, my father hit me, and I'm trying my best not to be so physically abusive, or not so much abusive, but physical with my son.
You feel like you've already been making efforts to change the way you're disciplining your child.
Yes, I have. That's one of the most important things to me as a father, because I don't assume that the way I was raised was right. I know there were some things about it that were good, but for the most part, I feel that there are things that I can improve upon, and I've been working hard to improve these things, or maybe, in my opinion, I've been working hard.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, how would you like to change the way you are with your child?
I'd like to be more patient.
I see.
Yes, more patient. I don't want to say understanding, because I do try I try to see, even though he's a child, I still try to see things from his point of view, which is very difficult. But I don't want him to grow up disrespectful, and I don't want him to grow up and come across as weak to other people.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
On the one hand, you want to improve the way you are with him, and you don't want to be so physical in your punishment.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you don't want him to be weak, and you don't want him to be disrespectful.
Yes, I feel it's important for him to understand the role of authority, and especially within the family. Yes, because it is my house. I consider it my house, and as my kid, I don't necessarily want him to be obedient, but I want him to be conscious of the decision maker.
You would like some respect from your son.
Yes, definitely.
And on the other hand, it doesn't seem like the way things have been going is getting you that what you want.
Yeah, sadly, I do feel that way. I feel that as I've tried to show authority with the physical, I don't think it's helping, because I think, I've been noticing that Mike's becoming gradually, but I've noticed that he's been more afraid of me lately. And when I do raise my voice, he becomes withdrawn. And when I become angry with him, he starts to cry a little. So I suppose in trying to make him stronger and not cry, so to speak, I believe maybe I'm kind of getting the outcome I'm trying to avoid.
So even though you're trying to have a child that's respectful
Yes.
and strong and not weak,
Yes.
what's happening is the exact reverse, which is that he's becoming afraid of you and kind of intimidated by you.
Yes.
And you don't like that.
Well, not at all, because that's how I was raised, and I guess my reaction wasn't to cry, so I assumed that Mike would be the same. I mean, they don't have a manual on parenting. So.
Yeah. Well, isn't that right? Yeah. Nobody gives you a manual and tells you how to do it right.
Yeah.
And you came out okay from the parenting you got from your dad, and you were thinking that it would turn out okay for Mikey. But as you're looking at the way things are going, you're saying, you know what? I think I need more.
Yeah, I definitely need more. I think.
So I hope you can see where she's a little stiff. That's just the way. That's Teresa Moyer. She's published a lot in Motivational Interviewing, but she's always kind of like that. But she does really good reflections, and so you can see where she partnered with him right off the bat to ask him, you tell me what happened. So he immediately felt comfortable saying, here's my side of the story, right? She was non-judgmental throughout the whole thing, even though he has some pretty firm beliefs. And if you watch the whole thing, you can see where he definitely has some firm beliefs. But she doesn't judge him throughout any of it. And she's able to, essentially, she's clarifying what his concerns are about his parenting, right? So that's part of focusing in this part of the session. So she elicits what concerns him about his current parenting, and then at the end, I stop it here because her last thing had to do with, and you want more. So she's really going on a limb to say that, because that's not what he said, right? He hasn't said, oh, I really want parenting, but he said he'd be willing to work on his parenting. And so she says, you want more. So hopefully you can see where she's setting it up for him to be at least somewhat interested in going to parenting classes at their agency. So she spends about, I think it's 10 or so minutes is the total, maybe 11. It's a total of about 11 minutes that she spends with him. So here I'm going to show you that what happens if we're too directive, don't do a good job partnering, and are not accepting. So what happens with Fred, and when we take a different approach? Now this is going to be Stephen Rolnick doing the interviewing. And the funny thing is, this is totally not his style. He doesn't like to be directive like this. But I think he does a pretty good job of it's probably a bit over the top in terms of directiveness. But let's see, how that impacts Fred. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. Couldn't find my thing here. It's not showing me the thing where I have it go. I don't know what's going on here. I can't find my what's going on?
Angie, you might have to exit the PowerPoint view and then open it up through the browser. Sometimes the embedded videos get funny.
Yeah, I think that's what happened.
You double click there.
It's not working right. And it usually does. So I'm like, okay, this is really strange. Like it's.
You have this video saved on your desktop?
Yeah, I think I do. Let's see here. I'm sorry, hey, I got through like an hour of this without a glitch. That's pretty good. Here we go. Oops, wrong one, sorry. Let's see if it'll work. And let me know if you can't hear it, Lindsay. If it ends up not playing right. Oh, shoot, that's not it. Here we go. I may have to forward, yeah. I have to forward through this. So there we go.
Fred, how do you do? My name is Steve.
How are you doing,
I'm
Steve?
a social worker in charge of the parenting program.
Okay.
Hey, Angie, we can't see the.
It's not here.
We can hear it, but we can't see it.
Processes that we need to talk about, check how you feel about them. Also for me to give you
can listen.
encouragement to take advantage of the opportunity that you've been given here. So first of all, do you mind if I just check a few things with you? Okay. My understanding was that there was an incident at home which was picked up by the school. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, it was picked up by the school. Then the teacher called the social worker, and you had a discussion with the social worker.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And you spoke to the social worker who felt that because you were involved in physical contact with your child, that was something that might make you suitable for this program that I run here.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah? Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're in the situation where we are asking you to come along to these parenting classes, which do you understand how long they go on for and that sort of thing?
Yeah, 6 classes, yeah.
There's 6 classes there, that's right, yeah. That's right. You okay about attending?
Yeah, I don't want to go.
You don't want to go.
I don't want to
Tell
go.
me why you don't want to go.
Because I think I do. I think I'm a good dad already. I don't have a problem with the way I've been doing things.
Right. And how do you see the link between being a good dad and hitting your child like that? And I don't mean to be personally rude, but if you don't want to come to the classes, how does that puzzle fit together for you? Can you see what I'm saying?
Well, he needs to know who's the boss, who's the authority. I mean, it's my house, so he's got to listen to me.
I get it. So as far as you're concerned, it's okay to hit the child because you're the father of the house, and so coming here now is not something that you really want to do.
Well, it's not okay to hit the child, but sometimes a kid needs a good smack.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I must say to you that the purpose of the parenting classes is to help you learn different ways of going about it. So I'm just hoping that you will take advantage of that opportunity, and so that this kind of episode that happened at school and so on can be avoided.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't happen all the time anyways, so I really don't see where the problem is.
Okay. Well, it can be a problem if somebody hits their child to the point where there's a mark and it's noticed by a teacher. Can you see why that's a problem?
Yes, I can understand that, but that's not me. That's not who I am.
Right. Okay. But I mean, you did hit the child.
Well, yeah, that's true.
You did hit the child, and that's the problem that we want to try and tackle in the parenting classes, to see if there's more constructive ways for you to discipline the children, other than by hitting them.
Well, I really don't see how someone could tell me how to raise my kid. It's my kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to get into an argument with you here now about it. We've just got a few more minutes. I just wanted to say to you that it is something that you could get some benefit from. And I'm hoping that those classes won't take the form of someone telling you how to raise your kid, but just discussing with you and other parents, mothers as well as fathers, ways of handling children so that they don't receive as much physical contact or abuse. And I don't want to say whether yours was physical contact or abuse. That's what the classes will help you work out.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'll be there. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming down here.
Right.
So let me put this back into, come here, slideshow, current slide. Okay, so which version of Fred would you rather have in your parenting group? Hopefully the first one, right? So either way, he's not thrilled about going, but he's already said he's gonna go because he's gonna comply. But in the second one, is he any more interested in learning about parenting? Did he motivate Fred at all? So we see that Stephen starts with telling him why he's been referred, right? So let me just check out the story so that, and then so it comes off like, so I can show you that I know what's going on, right? Like trying to almost kind of establishing his authority. And when he asks Fred about, well, what do you think about coming to these groups? And Fred says, well, I don't really want to go. He says, well, why don't you want to go? And of course his tone was pretty judgmental anyway. And when Fred explains, I think I'm already a good father, then Stephen Rolnick becomes confrontational, saying, well, how could you say that when you've had this allegation of abuse, right? So he gets confrontational. Now, that's what I mean, where maybe that's a bit over the top, that, we're not all going to be that way. I think how I might interpret that is to consider that if we might ask like, oh, well, why don't you want to go? Even if we don't ask it in a mean way. And he says, well, I think I'm a good dad already, is we might say things like, well, if you go to this group, this parenting, you could learn some new ways that would avoid, situations like this. So sometimes how we respond to that might not be as confrontational, but we're trying to still convince the client that they should want to come to this group. And that typically that doesn't really motivate anybody, basically. So he spent about, I think that was 4.5 minutes with him. The first one with Teresa Moyer, it if I let the whole thing run, it's about 10 minutes. So it takes a little bit longer, but the investment on the front end is typically worth it in the long run. So they've been demonstrating then these ORs for you, open-ended questions. I don't think we heard any affirmations yet, but we'll talk about that. A lot of good reflections. And then there is summarization, which is a form of reflections. So I'm going to go over each of these strategies. And then I'm going to talk about elicit, provide, elicit. And so we're doing good on getting, having some time for questions too. So the ORs, as they call them, they like to use their acronyms, right? So there's PACE, and there is ORs, and the change talk, which was desire, ability, reason, and need, and then commitment, activation, and taking steps, that's called darn cat. And now this is ORs, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarization. So the ORs also has a good analogy of, you know, rowing down the river of change, so to speak, so that that's where we're saying it is directional, that there is a goal in mind, that we are leading the patient in a particular direction, but we do it in a more accepting and supportive type, more supportive kind of way. So I mentioned open-ended questions, right? And that these are really the preferred method of trying to elicit change talk from them. So these are some examples of questions you might ask that get at change talk. So you might ask, as I mentioned earlier, you might ask open-ended questions that are more informational rather than related to building motivation. And that's okay. We still want people to use open-ended questions as much as possible. Like if you have questionnaires, sometimes it's good to sort of ask the questions broadly and see how they answer it, and then, you know, fill it in as you can, and then come back to asking the specific questions that might need to be asked. So that's something we might work on that when we do the face-to-face workshop. And so you might notice, you know, open-ended questions start with what, and tell me how, those kinds of words. It's very important that we use this language. And what I found is that sometimes people think they're asking open-ended questions, but they're really not. And that we tend to rely on the do you think, or you know, there's the ever-present can you tell me more about that question. So let's look at that for a second. And why are close-ended questions discouraged? Well, the first thing is that they tend to limit their responses. It also means that it prompts them less to do some deeper thinking. That if all I have to do, it doesn't mean they don't answer it open-ended. I know that some people do that. But it seems it can be very kind of biased. And so if you're asking something like, do you want to stop fighting at school, or do you want to work on your anger, that it's too easy to get into sort of a power struggle over that, rather than asking something more like, well, what do you think about working on your anger? There's a little less pressure to have the right answer, maybe. And making suggestions, like, have you thought about trying to walk away from them when you get mad? That this ends up being not as helpful. And sorry, there was a question there, so I just thought I'd answer it real quick. So this tends to actually be more leading. That it shows kind of, you know, we worry about, well, the client's just going to say what they think you want to hear. Well, they're going to do that no matter how you do stuff, but they're less likely to get away with it. If you really are asking open-ended, then they really have to answer, and they really have to think about it. And even if they're telling you a bunch of BS, at least they're talking change. So that's better than setting them up to be defensive. And sometimes, you know, what happens when you make those suggestions is they say, yeah, I've tried that, but that didn't really work for me. Well, why didn't it work for you? You know, or how did that go for you? So we end up getting too much into trying to find the right answers, rather than really trying to focus on understanding them and helping them their own conclusions about change. Having said that, yet sometimes permission questions can be appropriate and respectful. So Teresa Moyers did it with Fred when she asked him, well, can you tell me more about that? Like, how would you like to improve your parenting? So she still kind of ended up rephrasing it into more open-ended. But I would suggest that we use this cautiously, that you use it when you really are seeking permission, that there might be a touchy topic and you want them to be able to say, I don't feel like talking about that right now. So maybe a sensitive topic, or you're not sure about your rapport with the person, then you can say, can you tell me more about that? Otherwise, just go straight in, just say, tell me more about that. How does that help you? Asking open and, what can you tell me about that? So ask it open-ended where at all possible. Otherwise, it's easier for them to get out of answering it, basically. And you can also use it as a way to check in with the client. So maybe like after you did a summarization type reflection, you might say, did I miss anything? Do I have that right? Can we talk about the change? Are you ready to talk about change? Is this something that you're ready to work on? So you're checking it out with them before you move on to something. So in that way, these are okay. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. And we're gonna, like I said, we will do some practice on open-ended questions when we do face-to-face. Then we have affirmations and or. So this is, we mentioned earlier, is a positive feedback. Technically, the definition is a positive judgment. So they can feel really demoralized. And this is one way that you can show them that you believe in them even when they don't believe in themselves. So this isn't encouraging. This isn't saying, oh, I think you can do it. I mean, you can say that at some point, but that needs to be backed up by why, right? That really what it's about, it isn't about saying, you can do this, I believe in you. It's, you can do this because here's what I hear you saying. Here's the successes that you've had. Here are your strengths. Here are your skills. So, your persistence, qualities, things about them that you want to make sure that they know. So these aren't really reflections. They sound like reflections because it is based on what they're telling you, but this is really your positive judgment. So in this way, they really are kind of subjective, but they do, they help them feel better, right? Who doesn't want a little bit of praise? So this is a way to help build confidence and hope for change. And sometimes they're not always that easy. So there's some things that they talk about, you go, yeah, that's great, that's fantastic, and it's easy to affirm them in it. But what if it's something that, they're seeming so negative that you really have to look at the glass as half full rather than half empty? So let's say that the mother says, I've tried everything I can think of to get my kid to behave and nothing works. I just want to give up. I mean, what do you say to that, right? She's feeling really demoralized. She's exhausted, right? So you can give a reflection like, yeah, that's really exhausting. But I think really would be more meaningful is to give an affirmation. Like, think about what she's been doing. You've been very determined to be a good parent. You must care very much about him or her. So in a way, it's almost like a reframing reflection is really kind of what it is in this example. So it's showing them something positive, right? So this is a quality about this person. They've really tried, that they need to be commended for that might be something that they haven't heard. Maybe they've only been told what they're doing wrong and not what they're doing right. So that's an example of an affirmation. So now let's look at reflection. So this is really probably takes the most practice. People struggle the most with it, and that they can do, a lot of times people can kind of do the simple reflections, but getting better with these really takes practice. I mean, it's like, playing a musical instrument, any kind of talent like that, is most people aren't born right immediately knowing how to do it. We have to refine, we have to practice and get better at it. Reflections and accurate empathy absolutely require effort. And it's something that I've had to work at throughout my career to get better at. So this is something we'll practice when we meet face to face. But so reflections are how we demonstrate accurate empathy. And we call them reflections because really we are like a mirror for our patients, for our clients. And it's a mirror because it is stated. So, you know, your reflection, like how you look in the mirror is how you look, right? We don't say, so what you look like is, right, is that we want to avoid those sort of setups. You know, and it's okay to start out that way, but at some point you want to get confident. You've got to get confident in your empathic reflections. So this is a way, as I mentioned earlier, it's a way to hear, to make sure that you're hearing them correctly to clarify, but it's also important for them to hear themselves. This is what you're telling me. So it does help build that rapport because they're like, oh yeah, you get me. And when you get a reflection right that brings a little bit more meaning and they go, yeah, that's what I mean. I just love that moment. Like that just says, yes, I'm getting this person. So we need to remember that these are statements. They're not questions. And when we're not confident, we tend to do that question on the end, right? Like, so what you're saying is that this is something that that surprised you, and then we put that question on the end. Don't do that. You know, just say it. So it's something that surprised you. And you may be wrong, and that's okay. But if you're doing good reflections, you're making a good effort, most people aren't going to get annoyed. Like, make your best guess. And even if you're off a little bit, they clarify it. They're like, no, not really that, it's this. But you're still prompting them to think just as much as you would an open-ended question, is that they're still thinking about it and trying to clarify it more in their own minds. Then you're still moving things on. That's the idea of reflections, is it should continue to move the conversation. Just like Teresa Moyers did with Fred, is she really kept it moving towards, you know, what are your concerns about your parenting and what do you want to do about it? Reflections are also very important during that engagement. Remember, we said the first step of the process is to engage, because you need to build that rapport, right? It helps you build the rapport through accurate empathy, that you're able to get their perspective. Again, it doesn't mean you agree with them. It just means that you're understanding where they're coming from, and that helps them feel understood and safe. Generally, you know, unless you're like doing real quick things, like sometimes health coaches, maybe you do certain check-ins with clients that aren't meant to be sessions, that just a quick check-in, then you don't do as many reflections. So you're going to ask a question, let them answer it, and then give a quick reflection, and then ask another question to keep it moving along, to be more directive in that sense. So you move it along more quickly. But if it's a session, then you need to take time to use reflection. So you ask the open-ended question, let them answer it, give a reflection, and I would wait and see if they add more to it before you go to your next question. So really what you're focusing on is really what they're saying. What do they mean? You're constantly interpreting, what do I think they mean by that? What does that mean? What does that say about them? What are they struggling with? What does that say about their level of motivation? And thinking about, do they have problem recognition? Do they have confidence? How ready are they? And so I use that. And then, I mean, you'll come to your open-ended questions, but try not to focus so much on what do I say next, that you're just interpreting everything that they're saying to you. Generally, the Miller and Rolnick say, for every open-ended question, do 2 more reflections before you ask another question. That's sort of a general guideline, but again, they say if you need a manual for this, then you're not doing MI. So, but if you feel like you're going in circles and it's not getting anywhere, maybe the client gets annoyed and says, that's what I just said, then your reflections are too simple. And so it's time to kind of work on getting a little bit deeper with it. So, I think I have time to go ahead and show this quick thing. Let me see how long. I think it's about 4 minutes. It's really funny, but I think it's a great demonstration of how just being more empathetic and reflecting can be helpful. Because really, you know, we're going to talk about clients, but we can use this with everybody. I use it with students that I teach. I try to use it with my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, as much as I can. So this is cute and funny, but it talks about empathy. here. So if you want to, hopefully this will work.
I'm thinking of getting bangs.
Oh, you totally should. You would be so cute with bangs. You have the face for it. I don't. Oh, there's my better half. Kim, would you mind? Hey, honey, where are you?
Oh, I'm on my way to Downey.
Oh, did you know Karen and Richard Carpenter grew up in Downey?
What a random and not helpful fact, Phil. I'm sorry. I'm having kind of a rough day.
Yeah, I'm kind of having a rough day myself.
Look, Phil, I need you to take care of dinner for me.
What's wrong?
Oh, Alex ripped Haley's favorite sweater, and now I'm driving around from store to store trying to find the exact same one before Haley finds out.
Don't do that. Just explain to her what happened.
Haley's not going to understand.
Sure she will.
No, Phil, you don't understand. I'm trying to avoid this turning into a whole big thing.
Then just get her something close. She'll never know the difference.
Phil, could you just take care of dinner, sweetie? That's all I'm asking. That's it.
I'm just saying there's a simpler way to do this.
There is no simpler way. Just make dinner. Thank you.
Hello? Okay, I'm confused. You're saying that if she tells me she has a problem, I'm not supposed to help her?
Not unless she asked for your help.
But if she lets me help her, I can make her problem go away.
That is such a male thing to say.
Well, forgive me for being a man.
Mango or kiwi?
Ooh, kiwi.
When you say, do this or do that, all she's hearing is, I'm smarter than you.
Believe me, she doesn't think that.
She doesn't want you to solve her problems. She just wants you to give her support so that she can solve her problems herself.
Yes, and sometimes she just wants a sympathetic ear.
Whoa, whoa. Maybe it's all the creams, but that just made sense, girlfriends. So if Claire says, I hate getting stuck in traffic, I shouldn't say, maybe you should leave earlier, or don't get on the freeway. I should just say, I know, it's so frustrating.
Yes, that's
Really?
it. Yes.
And if she says, the waiter I had today was so rude, I shouldn't say, maybe you should just order something on the menu for once.
No.
I should just say, what a jerk.
Yes.
And if she says, Bill, the TV's driving me crazy, I should just say, I know, there is not enough quality programming for women.
No. Turn off the damn TV.
Okay, now I'm confused again.
Back yet?
She's on her way. Did you find it?
I did. At the fifth store I went to, it was in the window, and I had to undress a mannequin while a creepy guy filmed it, so we have that to look forward to on the internet.
Thank you so much, Mom.
You're welcome. Now go put that exactly where you found the other one, okay? Okay. Mwah.
Uh-oh.
What?
The security tag, it's still on.
Those people that take that off? No.
She's pulling into the driveway.
Okay, it's fine. Don't panic. I've got it.
She's getting out of the car.
I'm doing it. I've almost got it. Oh, God. Oh, no.
What is that?
Well, it's ink.
She's in the house. What are you doing with my sweater? Oh my God, it's ruined. It was an accident. I knew this would happen, you idiot.
Hey, let's try to get along.
I wish she was never even born. They were trying to make one with a brain.
No, honey, you guys are both pretty smart.
Oh. It's that sweater, huh?
Yeah, it is. That sweater. And I did everything I can to stop them from fighting.
I don't understand why they can't see how much you love them.
I don't know. Meanwhile, Cheryl has been calling me all day because she's angry I didn't show up.
Doesn't Cheryl have a housekeeper and a nanny? Why does she need so much help?
I know, right?
You work so hard. You do so much.
I do.
Of course you do.
I do. Oh, sweetie, thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right, so that's kind of cute, huh? But he gives it a try, right? That he's trying to be understanding. So we have to be able to kind of try to get into their shoes, as we mentioned. So reflections require empathy. And we don't want to just rehash what they just said, right? So if somebody says, I don't like conflict, to just sort of get a simple tip of the iceberg approach, you might say, well, you prefer to get along with people. So, I mean, that's accurate, but it doesn't necessarily get at, why are they saying this? What do they really mean? And of course it helps to, there's no context to this at all, so I apologize. But let's say that you do know this person, and when they start talking about it and you know them, you know their past, you might be able to offer more, something complex, and offer, it reminds you of how your parents were when you were growing up, for example. I just made that up. But if we think about it like that iceberg. So if you hear, if you hear something like, I wish I were more sociable, what might you reflect back? Like, what do you think they might mean by that? So I actually want you to, type, go ahead and type, I have my chat box open, type in some suggested reflections. So let me see a couple of potential reflections to that. So you would like to interact more comfortably with peers. Yeah, so maybe they're just feeling like, I don't really know. So might do with their social skills, right? So it could be, so don't ask it, Nisha, but you would say you're trying to be more interactive. So maybe they mean they want to spend more time with people that are important to them, right? So social skills, spend more time. What might be one other meaning behind this? You would like to be alone less often. Yeah, maybe they feel lonely. Very good, y'all. Awesome. You want to connect with others because you feel like you don't have enough support. Yeah, you want to meet more friends. You don't have enough friends or enough social support. You'd like to engage with people more. Very good. All right, you guys are going to be awesome. Thank you so much. So I had some, let's see, I have to get my thing. So here were some of my examples. To it is, I feel lonely and want to, or you feel lonely, I put it as I mean that. I feel lonely and want to have more friends. You get nervous when you have to talk to strangers. You want to spend more time getting to know people. You'd like to be popular, maybe popular. That was one we didn't talk about, right? It was, I just want to be popular. I can't think of what to say when I'm with people. People don't invite me to their parties. I want to get out more, right? So any of those, all of those fit with what each of you were able to identify. So do you see where that kind of makes a little bit more meaning for the person when they say, I wish I were sociable? Now you could just say, what do you mean by that, right? And you can, that's okay too. But part of this is really more about the empathy, and that if you can get in there and understand, then there's that aha moment, where you could ask them, what do you mean by that? And it still might work out okay. But if you are the one getting it right away, that can just be even more meaningful, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there's some different types of reflections. I think we're doing okay on time, but I may go through these kind of quickly. These are some examples, and I'll share this stuff. I'll share this PowerPoint with you. I'm sorry, I apologize, I didn't send it out earlier. So there are we talk about simple reflections, which is really just restating what they just said, or reflecting maybe even feelings, like, oh, that makes you angry. So keeping it sort of simple, and that's not necessarily wrong or bad. It's just, if we do only that, then they're probably going to get annoyed with us. So we want to get more complex. So underneath the tip of the iceberg, to guess at what they mean, to add a little bit more to it. And you are taking some chances with that, but it can really be helpful. You might use metaphors are a type of reflection. So, if you're somebody who likes to use, an analogy of something, like this one just says, that lit a fire under you. But sometimes, people say, it sounds like, maybe you use sports analogies. Of course, it depends on the client. So like if you use a sports analogy with me, it's not going to go very far. I'm not a big sports fan. But if you use a musical analogy with me, then I play music and I enjoy music. So that might be helpful to, bring more clarity, right? And then reframing. So this is kind of placing something in a new light. So just like the woman at the beginning when she was, I mentioned it for his absolute worth, but kind of bringing it around, or the affirmation that I said, bringing it into, it's bringing something positive to it. So interpreting it in a positive light to kind of help the client reframe it a little bit. Sorry, and then I have a couple more. We could also continue the paragraph. So you actually this really is going out on a limb and, adding something that maybe they didn't really say it yet. So let's say the person, you're motivated to exercise when you can be outside and you're interested in exploring this again. Maybe they didn't really say that yet. They didn't say, I really want to exercise outside again, but you add it because you're trying to move it along. It really can help move things along. Maybe you might say, you're here today, you came to the appointment, you've been unsure about going to sessions, but you could be interested in giving this a try. So you're sort of offering it up instead of saying, would you be willing to give this a try, as you throw it out there as if it's something that they are considering. Then there's double-sided. So the last few here really are the ones I tend to use a lot. Reframing, I do use some, but double-sided is the one you want to use to really emphasize that ambivalence. So this is the one time that these right here are ones where you might use the sustained talk. So you take the change talk and the sustained talk. Really, you want to start with the negative first. Like on the one hand, you don't like working out at the gym. At the same time, though, you're feeling more motivated since meeting with your doctor. And you want to use the word and or yet. Don't use the word but. Don't use the word but, because now you've just negated everything you said before it. So it's too discounting. So we want to try, and I still mess it up. I still have to work on it too, but trying to say and or yet. And so that really emphasizes that ambivalence, because you want to raise it before you resolve it. You can also using undershooting or amplified with sustained talk. So what you're trying to do is get more. If you do undershooting, you're trying to get more out of them, where you say like, well, some days the gym doesn't do it for you. So you're hoping the person's going to respond with, well, I mean, it's not really that bad. So you're kind of hoping that they'll talk a little bit more about it. Or maybe they'll just say, yeah, I just don't know that being stuck inside with a bunch of people I don't know, that's really, but you still get more out of them, that they continue talking about it. So you get to find out maybe what does work. The amplified is you're actually trying to get them to you're almost trying to use reverse psychology kind of stuff, like you overstate. So if you say you hate exercising indoors, they might say, well, I wouldn't say I hate it. Yeah, it's maybe not really my thing, but sometimes it's okay when So now you're getting some change talk. Or I use it in substance abuse, and I'd say, so you definitely absolutely feel like you don't have a problem with your drug use at all. And I say it very neutrally, just like, this is what you're telling me. I'm not like, judging them or snarky about it, but just saying, this is what I'm hearing you say. And that you're hoping is that, well, I didn't say it's not ever a problem. It just isn't right now. Oh, well, when was it a problem? So you take what you can get out of it, hopefully. Now, they can always come back. The playing with undershooting amplified is that they can always say, yep, that's right. Okay, you just move on. Then you know where you're at with the client. So these aren't the end all be all, but I think I really like these examples. And I think I really, really want to show this. This is, I may cut it off. It's 4 minutes that I clipped from this. I may cut it off a little sooner just to save time, because I got about 10 more minutes to finish. I still want to do provide elicit. But I want to show you this because this is an awesome clip of Bill Miller working with a guy who doesn't talk. So, you know, sometimes that's the thing about MI is you say, well, I asked open-ended questions and they still just shrug their shoulders and don't say anything. So if you have somebody who's just not talkative, that actually more questions is not the answer. It's really good empathy that we need. This is pretty amazing. If you can watch this whole clip, it's called Silent Man, and you can find it on YouTube. So it's a clip of Bill Miller interviewing this guy. It's kind of an oldie like the Teresa Moyers one, but it's really good. And I actually asked Bill Miller, I've met him a couple times, and I said, how did you do this? Like, this is such an awesome session. And he said, you know, I did not even know what it was going to be about. It's not like they said, oh, you're going to deal with a guy who's quiet. They just said, okay, go do MI with this guy, and didn't give him any preparation for it. And I'm just awed. So I'm going to show you a few minutes of this really, really quiet guy. Hopefully you can understand him. He kind of mumbles.
John, you called up and indicated that you'd like to talk to someone here, and so I'd like to know how I might be helpful to you.
Had to come because of
So some problems you've been having and someone has made you come here.
Yeah.
You're not too happy about that.
I just like to take care of my own problems.
So talking to somebody else about them is hard. It's not something you're used to doing.
No.
And yet someone else has said you need to be here. Tell me a little bit about that.
My wife, she wants to you know, she works and I work and take care of the kids together. She says she wants to go back to school and, you know, study to be a nurse or something. I don't think she needs to.
That seems silly to you.
We're just doing okay.
You like things the way they are now, and that feels like a real big change.
Yeah.
There's some things about it in particular that you don't like.
It's just everything's okay.
So why change? Why mess it up? Things are going along okay, and now she wants to get some more school, some more education, and it's disturbing. It changes things.
She's got the kids, you know. She's got her job.
She already has enough to keep her busy.
I think so, but she don't. So we argue.
You're happy with the way things are. She's not quite satisfied with how things are, and she wants something else. She wants to get some education. And that's not okay with you.
She says things will be better. I can, you know, I can see that, I guess, but I don't. She's got plenty to do, you know. Everything's okay. She just keeps on and on about it. It's
really important to her.
I guess. I just wish she'd shut up, you know.
Can you try to imagine what Bill Miller's sitting there thinking at the time, right? But he keeps his game face on, right? This guy is pretty reserved, right? He clearly doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to talk about his personal business. And he only asked him a couple questions. So all the reflections are statements, right? He didn't say, is that because, you know, like check him out with him, or do you think? He just says it, right? He just says it. And almost in spots. But the guy keeps going, and he's very patient with him. I love that too. He just kind of waits to see what he says, but he's not judging this guy. And so I'm sure you can start to imagine now what his issue is. That I believe he's there because of domestic violence. So he's referred because of domestic violence. So to not be judged and say right off the bat, well, I understand you're here because you hit your wife. Tell me about that, right? So he's able to build this trust, a little bit of trust, because he starts talking more and more and more, and helps them to understand what is going on. So there's more to the session if you want to check it out. It's really interesting. So let me talk briefly about summarization and eliciting change talk, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. So summarization, you know, that is just bringing some stuff together, right? I mean, it is a form of reflection. It tells the client that, you know, you remember what they've told you, and that you want to understand how it fits together. And it helps to keep everybody on the same page. So it might feel redundant at times, but it is important to come back to and bring all this stuff together and put it sort of in, they call it a bouquet. You know, what have we talked about so far? So you can do it like the bouquet of collecting. So it might be like maybe they've talked about a list of their strengths or the benefits and costs of making a change, and you bring it all together for them so they can really hear it all, right? And then you might use it to, you know, you might say what else to elaborate, or you might use it to transition, which we'll talk about in a second. It could be used as a linking. So you could talk about, well, so far you've talked about this and that. It reminds me of what we talked about in a previous session when you said blah, blah, blah. So you're kind of helping them get some insight, right? And then transitionally, it could be to wrap up the topic and switch to another. So you sum up all of the pros and cons. Let's say you do the pros of changing, like how would you benefit if you make this change? And this is what you've said so far. What about the cons? Like, what if you don't make this change? What's going to happen? So use it to like shift to a new open-ended question. Or you can just use it to sort of wrap up the session. So summarization is nice and is something that we should use. And, you know, we typically need to do longer role plays to kind of get to that point, but we can certainly do that. So then we have, I'm going to do elicit, provide, elicit. So here's the whole thing. We've been saying we want to elicit from them, but what happens when sometimes you have to give some information, you have to clarify things, you need to give some suggestions, right? So there are some things to keep in mind how we should do this. And Miller and Romnick talk about this in the 3rd edition about elicit, provide, elicit. So this is where they clear up the fact that we're not saying you don't ever give advice or information in motivational interviewing. That is a misnomer if anybody's ever told you that. But we do it within the spirit of the approach. So generally what we like to do is we first of all say, you know, like there might be a permission. Well, I'm going to get to permission in just a second, but you know what you say, what would you like to know more about? Or what do you already know about how drugs affect you? What do you know about anger management? You know, whatever topic it is that you're covering with them, right? Maybe what would you like to know more about? So that way you're not giving them information on stuff they already know. And I don't know about you, but it really annoys me when my healthcare provider gives me information about stuff I already know. Instead, they'd be better off to say, what do you already know about managing this condition? What have you tried? You know, do it that way, and then give me additional information as needed. So the provide piece is to give a little bit more information. So you might, you know, reinforce what they were correct about, and then say, you know, there's some other things that might be helpful, and give a little bit of information. So try not to give too much at one time like I'm doing. So you just kind of present what you know, or you kind of what you know. So this is information. Let's talk about this in terms of giving information. So you give more information, and then you say, what do you think about that? Or what's your reaction to that information? What are your thoughts? So give them time to process it. And that was my timer to keep me on time. Give them time to process and to think about it. So that's the way you can do information. So make it an exchange. And that's what we call it, is an information exchange. Now, sometimes, well, when would you do this? When the client asks for advice, suggestion, or information, or maybe you're supposed to give information. Then you say, hey, I'm here to talk about blah, blah, blah. Why don't you tell me first what you already know about it? But it's also good to really, I would recommend waiting. Don't offer up information until you've tried to understand their perspective of whatever the issue is first. Like, what are your, why do you think I'm here today? Or why you're here? What do you understand about this issue? Try to get their understanding and stuff first before we get into, okay, here's some information or suggestions. So now here, this one is focused more on suggestions that, sometimes you say, well, what things have you tried? I really don't know. Just tell me, what do you think I should do? So if the client asks for advice or suggestions, or they say some, but you have some other ones, like they say, well, I don't know, I guess I've tried X and Y. And you say, well, there's some other things you could try too. Do you mind if I share those with you? That's permission, okay? So then if the client's like, well, what do you think I should do? I could suggest some things that work for other people, other clients, but the most important thing is to find what will work for you, and you're the best judge of that. So given that, would you like to hear some of my suggestions? Yes. So offer a menu of options. That's one of the biggest things. So, and we also, in that one, we reinforced autonomy too. So, we said, really it's up to you what you decide, but here's some suggestions and I'm going to ask you what you think. So you want to get their reaction to all of the ideas, right? So you do brainstorming. That's what we do with change planning, actually. So just kind of think about, if we're doing an MI, inconsistent information exchange, then we tend to be the expert. Stephen Rolnick did that with Fred, right? He was the expert. I'm the one who knows about parenting. I know that you should be here. If we just look at it as collecting information about the problem, that I'm going to diagnose your problem, and then I'm going to rectify any gaps in knowledge, that I'm going to fix it. I'm going to provide you the fix. That frightening information is helpful. My medical people like to do that sometimes. They're like, sometimes you just have to tell them they're going to die. It's like, okay, there might be a time and place for that, but that's not where you start, right? And that we try to say, what do you think is going to happen if you don't do this? What do you know about this disease? And that I just need to tell them what to do. So that's not MI. That is actually antithetical to it. Being consistent with it is you have some expertise, but that the clients are the experts on what will work for them. You find out what information they want and need, and you match what you give to them to their needs and strengths. What do they think is helpful? And certainly giving any kind of advice or suggestions that is going to help them be more autonomous, right? So what we're trying to do is avoid giving unsolicited advice, feedback, or directions. We don't want to assert our authority, which is, well, but you have to do this, right? So instead of saying, well, but you're supposed to do these groups, and these aren't because I'm saying, it's because so-and-so says you have to do them. We don't want to assert our authority, like you have to do these things. We want to avoid that direct confrontation and avoid the closed-ended questions. So sorry, I'm kind of rushing through that because we're almost out of time, and I just want to make sure that if you have any questions, go ahead and start typing those in if you have any questions. And so when we do the face-to-face, so I'm repeating the same workshop. So you just need to pick one. I don't know if you've already signed up for them or not, but you pick Baton Rouge, Lafayette, or Alexandria. And so we'll meet, we'll do a 6 hour. So this is 2 hours CEUs. There'll be another 6 hours for that. And we'll re-review these real quick. There'll be a quiz, haha. It'll be a quick quiz, it'll be a test. And then we'll practice recognizing the change talk, and then we'll go through and practice the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and then we'll do actual role plays and talk about some techniques, strategies as we call them, to elicit change talk. So what do you do? Now what do you do, right? How do you put this all together? So we'll spend some time working in some groups. I'll probably put you in groups of 3 that you all are going to kind of work together. And then I think that's kind of what we plan to do. So let me open my chat box. Okay. Yeah, I will, Lindsay, if I email this, I'm going to email this to you in a PDF. Yeah, Lindsay said, yeah, I will make sure that you all get that. Absolutely. Again, I apologize, I didn't have it ahead of time, but yeah, I guess you can kind of follow along, and you just didn't get a chance to print anything out. Any other questions?
All right, it looks like there were a few questions from earlier on. Somebody asked, which edition of Rolick and Miller's book do you recommend prior to the January seminar?
Yeah, so that's the 3rd edition. That's the most recent one. And that has all of the updates in it. It's very, very good. There's lots of strategies in there. I use it to guide all of my trainings. I think it's 2016 now. I can't believe it. Doesn't seem like it's been that long, but trying to, 2013, gosh, 2013. It just does not seem like it's been that long. And right, so you just attend one. So everybody should do the webinar, and then you can go to the face-to-face, choose one of either Baton Rouge or Lafayette or Alexandria, whatever fits in your schedule and you can get to. Another question was about contrasting the C and the A. Really, there's not a whole lot of difference in the darn cat, the C and the A. The C is commitment. So commitment is, I will change. And activation for change implies the commitment, like I'm willing to, I'm ready to. So it's really just a matter of semantics. And Lindsay, how do you want to do the CEU credit for today? I didn't know if you just want me to, if maybe email it to them, or give both the certificates when we do the face-to-face.
That's a good question. I think maybe we can distribute them during the face-to-face and have them separate, because there may be some folks who show up for face-to-face that didn't participate today.
Right, and if somebody can't make the face-to-face, they can just email you, and you and I will work out, getting it to them if they're not able to go to the face-to-face for some reason.
Right, and then someone just asked, since we are recording, if it will be available. And yes, we will send out a link, and if it's okay with you, Dr. Wood, we will put the recording up on our website.
Yeah, that'll be fine. I was thinking that too. It seems like that makes the most sense.
Okay. And then there was a question back, this was before the reflection activity, and it was for one of the videos you showed, and somebody asked where that clip was from again.
Yeah, so those are on YouTube. So I think that one, because it's from Modern Family, which I don't watch either, so that it doesn't matter, but but I think it's like, if you did Phil Dunphy from the show, like on Modern Family and Empathy, you should be able to find it in YouTube. And now the healthcare ones, I don't think all of those exactly are on YouTube, but the Fred one might be, the full Fred one. And then the guy at the beginning that I said, he said he didn't know if he wanted to go there. And she said, it's up to you, the older guy. That one's called The Rounder. I'll type it in here too, The Rounder. I think that one can be found on YouTube, and The Silent Man. I'll type that one in too, Silent Man. I believe those can be found accessible on YouTube. I think those are both very good. Even though they're old, they're really good. And there's a variety of other ones. It really is hard. And I do, I kind of apologize. I know some of them are healthcare related, and that's not what my audience is today. This is kind of a standard that I use with both, because I teach health coaches and I teach behavioral health people. But it's really, you would think that there would be a lot out there, but I look at those YouTube videos. I screened a bunch of them this weekend, and I just, a lot of them just don't thrill me. And I would like to do my own at some point, maybe, I don't know. Cause I know sometimes people feel like they're not very realistic. So, and like age group, I know some of you are working with children and adults. So, children and adolescents. So some of those aren't, they're okay. But I just haven't found that many that I found all that thrilling. I'm really tempted to use my daughter, who is almost 13 years old, and I'm tempted to kind of do some role plays with her because she is a theater student. She's sort of an actress. So I thought, well, maybe that would be okay. I might not get in too much trouble if I do that. Yeah, I'm trying to think any other questions. And then, so I think what I'll do, Lindsay, is I will email you the certificate with everything on it except the participant's name. And so those of you who do need the certificate that you can't go to the face-to-face, you can email Lindsay and at evidence to practice at lsuhsc.edu, I believe, and request that certificate.
Yes, Dr. Wood, that email is correct.
Okay. Send certificate. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, so there might be a few of you that can't go.
And for those of you that are planning on attending a training in Alexandria, Baton Rouge, or Lafayette, we may still have some space available. So if you have colleagues or anyone else in your local behavioral health networks that may be interested, please spread the word and have them register by the same link that you did. And we'll make sure that we get them the PDF with the information on the training logistics. And lastly, someone just asked if it'll just be a PDF. So we will send a PDF of the slides, and then there will also be a link to the recording of this. So you can watch back on the webinar itself as well.
Sounds good. All right, well, if that's pretty much it for now, and I really appreciate y'all listening and what little bit of participation we can have. I know this is difficult, but I really appreciate it, and I hope it was okay to listen this whole time. I hope the videos kind of broke it up a little bit. Great, thank you.
All right, and somebody asked if we have names of everyone on the call. So the way Zoom works is that we will see, if you entered the call with your name, we will know that you participated for CEUs. However, like Dr. Wood said, if you would like the 2-credit CEU certificate, just email us and request that. Otherwise, we will distribute at the training itself, in addition to those 6 CEUs. Because if you called in today just with a phone number, we won't be able to confirm. All right, well, thank you everyone so much. We appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you in January. Have a great holiday season.
Thank you.